The Nintendo Switch 2 is finally here, but if you already own a Switch OLED, is it actually worth upgrading? On paper, the Switch 2 is obviously more powerful, but the OLED has something the Switch 2 doesn't, an OLED display. So today, we're putting these two side by side to see what's actually different. Let's start with the most obvious difference, the size. The Switch 2 is noticeably larger than the original Switch OLED, and you can immediately see that when you put them next to each other. The Switch 2 also has a larger overall footprint, while the OLED model feels a little more compact. And when you're actually holding them, you can definitely feel the difference. The overall design language is still very familiar though. Nintendo didn't completely reinvent the Switch. Instead, they basically took the original concept and made everything bigger and more capable. Now this is where things get really interesting. The Switch OLED has obviously an OLED display. And OLED still looks fantastic. You get those deep blacks, strong contrast, and really vibrant colors. But the Switch 2 takes a completely different approach. Instead of OLED, you get a larger LCD display with a much higher resolution, HDR support, and a higher refresh rate in supported games. So while the Switch 2 has the technically more advanced display in terms of resolution and features, the OLED model still has one major advantage: those beautiful OLED blacks and contrast. And honestly, this is probably going to be one of the most subjective differences between the two. If you love OLED, you might actually prefer the Switch OLED screen in certain situations. But when we move from the display to performance, this is where the Switch 2 really pulls ahead. The Switch 2 is significantly more powerful than the original Switch hardware. And that means games can run at higher resolutions, with better graphics, more detailed environments, and improved performance. And this is one of those differences that's much easier to understand when you actually see it. Instead of looking at a specification sheet and comparing numbers, you can actually see the difference when you're playing. Textures, lighting, resolution, and overall image quality can all benefit from the extra horsepower. Another upgrade that you might notice immediately is loading times. The Switch 2 gets into the game significantly faster. This might sound like a small improvement, but when you're constantly launching games, entering areas, or loading saves, faster storage can make the entire experience feel much better. Next, let's talk about the controllers. The new Joy-Con 2 controllers are larger and have some pretty significant changes compared to the original Joy-Con. The biggest physical change is the way they attach to the console. And Nintendo has also added new functionality that wasn't available on the original Joy-Con. One of the more interesting features is the mouse functionality, which opens up some completely new control possibilities in supported games. So this isn't just a slightly redesigned Joy-Con. Nintendo actually added new functionality here. But there's one area where newer doesn't automatically mean better: battery life. The Switch OLED can still provide very respectable battery life, depending on the game and your settings. The Switch 2 has more powerful hardware and a larger screen, so battery performance isn't simply a case of newer equals longer. Your actual battery life will depend heavily on what you're playing and how you're using the console. So if you're someone who plays almost exclusively in handheld mode, this is definitely something to consider. So after comparing everything, here's the big question. Should you upgrade from a Switch OLED to a Switch 2? If you already have a Switch OLED and you're mostly playing older Switch games, indie games, or casual titles, you probably don't need to upgrade immediately. But if you want better performance, higher resolution gaming, faster loading, new Switch 2 games, and the new features that come with the hardware, then the Switch 2 is a much more compelling upgrade. And if you don't own a Switch at all, the decision is much easier. I'd go with the Switch 2. You're getting the newer hardware, better performance, new features, and access to the next generation of Nintendo games. The Switch OLED still makes sense if you can find one at a significantly lower price, and you mainly want an affordable way to play the existing Switch library. So, is the Switch 2 better than the Switch OLED? Absolutely. But that's actually not the question I think OLED owners should be asking. The real question is the difference big enough for you to upgrade? And for me, the biggest reason to upgrade isn't actually the screen. It's the performance. The faster loading, better graphics, higher resolution, and new games are what make the Switch 2 feel like a genuine next-generation console. But if you're perfectly happy with your Switch OLED and mostly play the existing Switch library, there's still plenty of life left in it. So that's the Nintendo Switch 2 versus the Switch OLED. If you already own the OLED, let me know in the comments. Are you upgrading to Switch 2 or are you sticking with your OLED? And if you enjoyed this comparison, don't forget to subscribe for more Nintendo Switch 2 content.